The night air was thick with smoke and sirens. Flames curled into the sky above Miller Street, casting an orange glow over the quiet town of Hollow Ridge. Officer Colton Raymer gripped the steering wheel tighter as his cruiser raced through the empty streets, lights flashing, engine growling. At his side sat Daisy, his K-9 partner of 7 years, her body tense, ears alert. They had responded to dozens of calls before, but something about this one felt different, heavier, more final. When they arrived, the house was already half swallowed by fire. An elderly neighbor screamed that someone might still be inside. Colton didn't hesitate. He clipped Daisy's leash, looked her in the eyes. "With me," he said. She didn't need the command. She was already moving. Inside, the smoke was a living thing, clawing at their lungs, blinding their eyes. Colton heard the crack of timber above, felt the heat press against his skin. Then, with a violent snap, the ceiling gave out. A thick beam came crashing down, pinning Colton's leg beneath it. Pain surged through him, sharp and unforgiving. He tried to move, but the weight was too much. The smoke closed in, making it hard to think, hard to breathe. Daisy barked wildly, refusing to leave his side. She tugged at his vest, pawed at the debris, circling him in desperation. "Go!" he choked out. "Get out of here!" But Daisy stayed. Then everything went black. Colton woke up to cold air on his face and distant voices shouting his name. He was outside on the sidewalk. The house behind him was still burning. EMTs swarmed, and firefighters rushed past. But all he could see was Daisy, standing beside him. Her fur was singed, one paw bleeding, but her eyes were locked on him. And in her mouth was his badge. The metal was scorched and bent, the lettering barely legible. But she held it gently, like it meant everything in the world. A hush fell over the street as firefighters and neighbors realized what had happened. No one said a word. They just stared at the battered dog and the man she refused to leave behind. Colton tried to sit up, wincing. "Good girl," he whispered, tears burning hotter than the fire behind him. As the paramedics worked, he held Daisy close. In that moment, surrounded by chaos and smoke, Colton realized something had changed, something deep. And it wasn't just about survival. The hospital room was quiet, except for the steady beep of the heart monitor and the soft hum of fluorescent lights. Colton Raymer sat upright in the bed, his leg wrapped in thick gauze and braced with metal. The pain medication dulled the ache, but it couldn't touch the storm inside his chest. Daisy lay curled at his feet, eyes open, ears twitching at every hallway noise. She hadn't left his side once since the fire, not even when the vet arrived to treat her burns. She refused sedation, refused separation. Colton ran his hand gently over her back, feeling the heat in her skin. "You saved my life," he whispered. "But why the badge?" That question hadn't left his mind since the fire. Out of everything she could have grabbed, radio, flashlight, even his belt, she brought the badge. Burned and barely intact. It wasn't just instinct. It meant something, something he hadn't figured out yet. Later that morning, Tanner McGraw, a younger officer Colton had mentored, stepped into the room with 2 coffees in hand. "Town's still talkin'," he said with a half smile. "You're a damn legend now, Raymer. And Daisy? People are saying she's got more heart than half the department." Colton managed a weak grin but said nothing. Tanner sat down beside him and looked serious. "The chief wants to know when you're up for a statement. You don't have to rush it." "I'll talk when I'm ready," Colton said, voice low. "I need to think. There's more to that night than smoke and fire." Tanner nodded, sensing something unspoken. As he left, Colton noticed a folded piece of paper tucked in the bag Tanner brought. A note, no name, just a line of neat handwriting. "Ask Maybelle Crowden about your father. She's been waitin'." Colton stared at the note for a long time. Maybelle Crowden was a name he hadn't heard in years. She'd been close to his mother and practically family when he was a boy, but after his father's death, she disappeared from their lives without explanation. Why now? And what did she have to do with the fire? Or Daisy's strange behavior? That evening, Cassidy Lynn Brooker, the town's young veterinarian, arrived to check on Daisy. Her voice was calm, gentle, and sure. "She's healing better than I expected," Cassidy said. "But she's holding on to something. She won't rest unless she knows you're safe." Colton nodded slowly. "Same goes for me, I guess." As night fell outside the window, Colton lay back, staring at the ceiling. The painkillers blurred the edges of his thoughts, but one thing was clear. Daisy had carried more than just a badge out of that fire. She carried a message. 2 days later, Colton stood on the weathered porch of Maybelle Crowden's old farmhouse. The paint had peeled in long strips, and the windmill behind the barn groaned like it remembered a time when things were less complicated. Daisy limped slightly as she stepped beside him, her burned paw still tender, but she refused to stay in the truck. She had insisted on coming, just like she had insisted on saving him. Again, Maybelle answered the door slowly, her eyes soft and tired, as if she'd been expecting him for years. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her hands trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from something heavier. "Colton Raymer," she said, almost breathless. "Lord, you look just like your daddy did in '82. Colton shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to respond. He hadn't come for flattery, he came for truth. "I got a note," he said plainly. "Told me to ask you about my father." He paused. "About the fire, too. I don't know what any of it means." Maybelle's smile faded. She stepped aside and opened the door wider. "Then you better come in, honey. We've got years to catch up on, and not all of it's easy to hear." Colton stepped inside, Daisy close behind. The house smelled of old books and sweet tea. Nothing had changed since he was a boy except the silence. It was thicker now, heavier. They sat at the kitchen table, sunlight cutting across the wooden floor in thin gold lines. Maybelle poured sweet tea into 2 glasses, though Colton didn't touch his. Her fingers tapped slowly against the cup. "Your father, Jebediah Rudin, wasn't just a cop," she began. "He was working with Silas Brackford back when the department was rotten. Before Silas was sheriff, before he wore any badge, he ran half this town from the shadows." Colton leaned in. "That's impossible. My father hated Silas. Always said he was a liar." Maybelle gave a sad smile. "Your daddy didn't start out bad, Colton. But things happened. Things that changed him. And when he tried to get out, people got hurt. That fire you walked into? That's not the first fire to tear through this town." Daisy let out a low whine under the table, like she understood something no one else did. Maybelle reached down and stroked her head gently. "That dog," she said. "She knew where to find your badge, didn't she?" Colton nodded slowly. "Then she knows more than she's saying. And you, boy, you're standing in the middle of something your father tried to bury." Colton looked down at Daisy, then back at Maybelle. The past wasn't just knocking. It was burning. The next morning, Colton sat in his truck outside the sheriff's office, his fingers tightening around the steering wheel. The conversation with Maybelle Crowden echoed in his mind. Could it really be true that his father, Jeb Rudin, had once worked side by side with Silas Brackford, before Silas ever wore a badge? And if so, why had no one ever spoken of it? Why had the truth been buried so deep it took a fire and a dog to dig it back up? Inside the office, Tanner McGraw greeted him with a smile that faded when he saw Colton's face. "You look like you slept in a memory," he joked softly. Colton didn't respond. "Is Silas in?" he asked. Tanner nodded. "He's in the back, going over the reports from the Elm Street fire." Colton walked past without another word. Daisy followed, limping slightly but determined. Her eyes locked forward as if she, too, knew something was about to break. Silas sat behind his desk, glasses low on his nose, reading a folder. He looked up and tried to smile. "Glad to see you on your feet, Raymer." Colton closed the door behind him. "Don't bother," he said flatly. "Tell me about Jeb. Tell me what really happened back then." The sheriff's expression shifted. Gone was the charm, the practiced calm. For a second, he looked afraid. "You been talking to Maybelle?" he asked. Colton didn't answer. He didn't have to. Silas leaned back slowly. Your daddy and I made mistakes. Back in '86, there was a drug bust that wasn't supposed to go public. Money went missing. One of our own got caught in the middle. Jeb tried to blow the whistle, but someone burned down the wrong house to send a message. He paused. Your mother never knew, but your father carried that guilt to his grave. Colton's breath caught. And you? What did you carry? Silas looked away. Survival. Colton didn't respond. He turned and left without another word. He needed air. He needed answers that didn't come dressed in silence. That night, he returned to his childhood home, now abandoned. The place where he'd grown up with echoes instead of truth. Daisy sniffed around the back hallway, then stopped suddenly, pawing at a loose floorboard. Colton knelt down, pried it open. Inside was a rusted tin box. He opened it with shaking hands. Old photos, a service revolver, and a file with his father's handwriting across the top. Brackford Confidential. Daisy sat beside him, still, almost reverent. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. It was just beginning. The file was stained and brittle. The ink faded with time, but Colton read each page like it was written in blood. Inside were surveillance notes, names of former officers, and copies of cash transfers that tied Silas Brackford to something much darker than backroom deals. There were photos, too grainy and old, but clear enough. One showed Silas standing with Colton's father, Jeb Crowden, outside a warehouse that had burned down 3 months before Colton was born. Another showed something worse. Silas handing a thick envelope to a man Colton didn't recognize. The name under the photo chilled him. Harlan Whitfield. Colton sat back, breath caught in his throat. The name Whitfield wasn't unfamiliar. Lewin Whitfield had been his high school sweetheart, the one woman he had ever truly let in. She was now a journalist in town. Smart, tenacious, the kind of person who'd ask questions until she found the answers, whether people liked them or not. And now her family name was in a file hidden beneath his father's floor. Daisy shifted beside him, ears perked. She was restless again, sensing something coming. Colton looked down at her, the file still open in his lap. You knew exactly where this was, he muttered. Did he show you? Did my father train you to find it? The thought seemed impossible. She was barely a pup when Jeb died, but maybe she remembered something. A scent, pattern, command. Maybe loyalty ran deeper than memory. Colton decided to take the file to someone who wouldn't turn their back on the truth. That afternoon, he drove across town to Marston's Grill, where Jolene Marston worked the lunch shift like she had for 30 years. She was pouring coffee when she saw him walk in with Daisy limping behind. Her face softened instantly. Well, I'll be, she said. Didn't think I'd see you two out and about so soon. He took a seat at the corner booth, pulling the file from under his coat. I need you to look at something, he said quietly. Jolene sat across from him, eyes narrowing as she flipped through the contents. Her hand froze over one photo. I remember him, she said. That's Harlan. He used to come in here, but he disappeared in '87. People said he ran off, but now I'm not so sure. As Jolene flipped to the last page, her lips tightened. Colton, this isn't just police business. This is family business. Colton leaned in. What do you mean? She looked at him, a tremor in her voice. Harlan Whitfield was Luann's uncle. The next morning, Colton stood outside the WHTC radio station, the local building where Lewin Whitfield hosted her morning talk show. The file burned like fire in his coat pocket. He hadn't seen her in years. Not since things fell apart between them, but something told him she deserved to know. And maybe, just maybe, she could help him make sense of it all. Daisy sat quietly beside him, head resting on her paws, watching the front door as if she knew who was on the other side. Inside, the studio buzzed with life. Interns rushing with coffee, engineers adjusting dials. But when Lewin stepped into the hallway and locked eyes with Colton, the noise faded. She stopped, hands still, lips parting slightly. Colton Raymer, she said, her voice flat but not cold. Didn't think I'd see you walk through these doors again. Colton gave a nod, unsure how to begin. I didn't come to stir the past, Luann, but I found something. and it has your family's name all over it." They sat in her small office, the hum of on-air broadcasts just beyond the walls. He slid the file across her desk. Lewin hesitated, then opened it. As she flipped through the pages, her hands began to tremble. Her eyes landed on the photo of Harlan Whitfield accepting the envelope from Silas Brackford, and she sucked in a breath. "I always knew there was more to what happened to him," she whispered. "They said he had gambling debts, that he ran off. But my daddy never believed that." Colton leaned forward. "He didn't run, Luann. He was silenced. And if my father was trying to expose it, then someone made sure he never got the chance." Luann's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She just stared at the file like it might catch fire again. "Silas is still sheriff, still protected. If you go public with this, Colton, you'll be putting more than yourself at risk." Her voice wavered, but there was steel behind it. "I don't care," Colton said. "The fire, the badge, Daisy pulling me out. It all led here. This isn't just about the past anymore. This is about what kind of man I am now." Lewin looked at Daisy, then back at Colton. "Then you need to be ready, because once this comes out, people you trust will turn. And not everyone in this town wants the truth." As Colton stood to leave, Lewin reached into her desk and pulled out an old cassette tape, labeled only with a date. August 3rd, 1987. She placed it in his hand. "He gave this to me once," she said. "Told me to keep it safe in case everything went wrong." Back at his cabin on the edge of town, Colton stared at the old cassette in his hand. The label, faded and curling at the corners, read simply, August 3rd, 1987. That was the summer his father had started acting different, quieter, more distant. The same summer the warehouse burned down. The same summer Harlan Whitfield disappeared. Daisy sat beside him on the worn couch, her head resting on his knee, as if bracing for what was to come. He rummaged through a box in the back room and pulled out his old tape player, the one he hadn't touched in decades. The machine clicked as he slid the tape inside. He pressed play, and a burst of static filled the air. Then his father's voice broke through, gravelly, tired, frightened. "If you're hearing this, something's gone wrong." Colton froze. Daisy sat up. The voice continued. "Silas made a deal. Not with dealers, not with gamblers, with landmen. The fire at the warehouse wasn't random. It was a message. They were using that place for cash drops, money laundering. I tried to stop it, but the DA wouldn't touch Brackford. Said it'd blow back on too many powerful people." The words hit Colton like a punch to the gut. His father hadn't been corrupt. He'd been surrounded, cornered. Then came the part that chilled him. "If anything happens to me, go to Maybelle Crowden. She knows where the file is, and if it ever comes down to it, trust Daisy. I started training her for something bigger than obedience. She remembers smells, sounds, and places. She's smarter than people realize." Colton stared at his dog, the weight of the moment pressing in. His father had trained Daisy to find the truth. The tape ended with silence. No goodbye, no warning. Just the sound of his father breathing heavily before the recorder clicked off. Colton sat back, overwhelmed. His father hadn't just suspected Brackford. He'd tried to stop him. And he'd used Daisy, still just a pup, to leave behind a trail only his own blood could follow. As the sky darkened outside, headlights pulled into the gravel driveway. Colton stepped outside, hand instinctively on his sidearm. But it wasn't a threat. It was Cassidy Lynn Brooker, the town's vet. She stepped out of her truck, holding a manila envelope in her hand. "Found something," she said. "Was cleaning Daisy's medical records and came across an old note. It's in your dad's handwriting." Colton opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sentence. "They'll come for the dog before they come for the truth." Colton didn't sleep that night. He sat in the dark living room, shotgun across his lap, eyes fixed on the front door. Daisy slept beside him, but restlessly, ears twitching at every sound outside. The note from his father echoed in his mind. "They'll come for the dog before they come for the truth." He didn't know who they were yet, but something told him they were already watching. And he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't letting anyone take Daisy. Just after 3 a.m., headlights flashed through the curtains. A black SUV rolled up silently, no lights, no markings. Colton stood slowly, heart racing. Daisy was already at the door, growling low in her throat. He peered through the side window and saw two men get out, one with a silenced pistol tucked into his jacket, the other holding a syringe. This wasn't a break-in. It was a recovery mission. Before they reached the steps, Colton threw open the front door, pump action ready. "Back off," he shouted into the night. "You come for the dog. You better be ready to die for it." The men froze. For a brief moment, neither moved. Then slowly they backed away. One of them spoke. "We don't want trouble, Raymer. We just want the animal. That file you found, it's incomplete. She has the rest." After they left, Colton locked every door and window. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from rage. They weren't just covering up old crimes. They were actively hunting anything that could expose them. And Daisy wasn't just a loyal partner now. She was evidence. Breathing, living evidence. He knew he had to act fast, or neither of them would survive the week. At sunrise, he drove out to see Maybelle Crowden again. She answered the door in her robe, eyes already red. "They came here too," she said. "Said they were looking for a missing K9. But they weren't from the sheriff's office, Colton. I know how real lawmen walk. These boys walked like they were used to not being told no." Colton felt the last bit of safety slip from beneath his feet. Back at his truck, Tanner McGraw was waiting, arms crossed, serious. "I heard about the visitors," he said. "I don't know everything, but I know enough. Silas is running scared. He's been shredding files since yesterday. He's trying to erase every trace." Colton nodded slowly. "Then it's time to stop being quiet." Tanner looked down at Daisy. "You sure she's ready for what's coming?" Colton didn't hesitate. "She's the only one who ever was." The town courthouse stood cold and empty that Sunday morning, its old brick walls soaked in years of secrets. Colton Raymer parked his truck across the street, Daisy sitting tall in the passenger seat. Tanner McGraw met him by the front steps, his face pale, eyes hard. "He's in there," Tanner said. "Figured you'd want to handle this yourself." Colton nodded. "Yeah, this ends today." Inside, Silas Brackford stood alone in his office, shredding documents. The hum of the machine stopped when he heard the door creak open. He turned slowly, eyes narrowing. "Colton," he said, his voice even. "What a surprise." Colton stepped forward, placing the confidential file on the desk. Daisy sat beside him, tail still, eyes fixed. "We're not here for small talk, Silas. You've got one chance to tell the truth, before I put it on every front page in Tennessee." Silas laughed dryly. "You think anyone cares about things that happened 40 years ago? Half the men in that file are dead. The other half own banks." His gaze shifted to Daisy. "It's the dog, isn't it? She led you to the file." Colton's jaw tightened. "She remembered everything. Every place my father trained her to go. She's the reason I know what happened to Harlan Whitfield. The reason I know you let him die to protect your deals." The sheriff's mask finally cracked. His hands shook as he reached for a drawer. Colton pulled his weapon. "Don't," he warned. Silas froze. Slowly, he sat back down, staring at the dog. "Your father was brave," he muttered. "But he was a fool. He thought the truth could fix things. He thought people like Harlan mattered more than the order we kept." Colton stepped closer. "You're going to confess, on record, or I'll hand this file to every journalist from here to D.C." Silas smirked. "And you think they'll believe a wounded cop and his dog over the sheriff?" At that moment, Lewin Whitfield stepped into the room, voice sharp and clear. "They'll believe the tape, and the names, and the fact that your fingerprints are on every lie in this town." She held up the cassette recorder. Tanner stood behind her, camera phone already recording. The net was closing. Daisy let out a low growl. Not out of anger, but warning. Silas looked around the room. He knew it was over. His shoulders sank. "He left a trail," he said quietly. "Even dead, Jeb Riordan is still haunting me." Colton stepped back. "He's not haunting you, Silas. He's finally being heard." 2 weeks later, the courthouse was full. Reporters lined the hallways, townsfolk filled the benches, and camera crews spilled out onto the courthouse lawn. The once quiet streets of Hollow Ridge now buzzed with a story too big to hide. Silas Brackford, disgraced and defeated, sat behind the defense table with his head low. Colton Raymer watched from the back row, hand resting gently on Daisy's head. She sat calmly, eyes scanning the room, as if she too understood what this day meant. When the verdict came, guilty on multiple counts of conspiracy and obstruction, a collective breath left the room. Justice had taken too long, but it had finally arrived. Colton closed his eyes. He didn't feel triumph. He felt release, not just for himself, but for his father, Jeb Riordan, for Harlan Whitfield, and for the silence that had swallowed this town for decades. The truth had cost dearly, but it had survived. Outside, the sky was clear, and the sun hit the courthouse steps just right. Lewin Whitfield stood beside Colton, holding a notepad full of names, dates, and quotes. Her eyes glistened, but her voice was steady. "We're running the story tonight. Front page, front and center." Colton nodded. "Make sure you print the photo of Daisy. She deserves it more than I ever will." Lewin smiled. "She already has the town's heart, Colton. You just gave it back its soul." That evening, back at the cabin, Colton placed his father's old badge on the mantel, blackened and bent, just like the one Daisy had carried out of the fire. Beneath it, he placed the tin box and the cassette tape, not as trophies but as truth, preserved. He looked out the window, the wind rustling through the trees, and thought of everything they had lost, and everything they had reclaimed. Cassidy Lynn Brooker stopped by just before sunset. Daisy ran to greet her, tail wagging, burn scars fading with time. Cassidy handed Colton an envelope, official papers for Daisy's retirement from the K-9 unit. "She's earned it," Cassidy said, petting her gently. "She's not just a dog. She's living history." Colton nodded, emotion tightening in his chest. "She saved me more than once," he said softly. "And somehow, she saved this whole town." As night settled in, Colton sat on the porch, Daisy at his feet, the stars stretching wide above them. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel heavy, felt honest. His father's ghost was no longer a weight on his back. It was a voice in the wind, finally at peace. And Daisy, ever faithful, rested her head on his boot, guarding not just her partner, but the truth.